What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Commentary for Jimmy Smith, Ryan Moody, our MMA show, here to take a look back at Felder versus Hooker. This was UFC Fight Night 168 from Auckland, New Zealand. Jimmy, I just want to get your impression. Well, I guess it doesn't matter because you didn't watch this live. I watched this card, with such passiveness because I was just ready to get to the main event and then get on to Fury and Wilder. Do you get that way when you're watching things in sequence like that? When there's an event afterwards that you want to see more, that you almost gloss over what you're trying to enjoy?
Yeah, it can certainly go that way, especially in a card like this that a very entertaining card. But, it's a fight night card, so it doesn't have the biggest names until the main event. Felder versus Hooker, that's a big deal. But in the case of big boxing, and I mean big boxing, and Fury Wilder is big boxing, it doesn't get a whole lot bigger than that. When it's really heavyweight boxing is matches up 2 stars, especially in a rematch like that, it's huge. And that took a lot of thunder away from a card that I think was very good for the UFC, but a fight night card that didn't have a ton of huge names on it. So yeah, I, full disclosure, worked the SiriusXM show for Wilder Fury, so I had to watch that. And I had to really pay attention and study and stuff. So I didn't want to watch MMA first and kind of be too tired or whatever like that. So I said I'll catch up on MMA, which I did this morning. But I had to focus on boxing that night, so I wasn't able to watch them back to back.
Can you just peel back the curtain, just a skosh, and let people know what goes into a full day, a big boxing event like that with you? Are you waking up in the middle of the day? You know you're going to bed at 3 a.m., right?
Yeah.
So how do you prepare for that, just briefly?
Night before, I stay up super late. And then I try and sleep in as much as humanly possible, as much as life lets me, which it doesn't often do. And then I try not to do things like train that day or because people don't understand that when you're doing a show, being a commentator or a radio show or something like that, you're not just talking. You got to be up. You got to be excited. You got to be, hey, welcome SiriusXM Fight Night, post-fight, Wilder. You can't go, fuck, it's 1 a.m. I am really tired. You just can't do that. So the energy level, whenever you're calling an actual show or doing a radio show for something like that, is your energy level has to be really high. So when I did a show in Canada a couple of weeks ago, some guys were training, that knew the promoter and were like, hey, could you come train with us this morning? I said, no, I can't do anything the day of a show because I'll be a little tired. I'll seem a little flat. Something might happen where I get, bruised up or injured or something. And so, yeah, you try not to do anything the day of a show because your energy level has to be really high. And that's why I didn't watch MMA beforehand because, there were some exciting fights. I might be really into it. And then by the time 1 o'clock rolls around, I'm just too tired. So I just decided to focus on boxing. But yeah, you try and get as much rest as you possibly can.
All right. Well, there you go. Little layer of the onion peeled back. We started this card, and I swear, when I looked at these events, I look at them, and then we go over them, and then if they change, who knows? So we actually ended up inadvertently bonus coverage on the prelim. Tagogov versus Aguilar, and listen, all of a sudden, I guess we've got a guy with first-round power. I didn't see it, at least in the past fights. It's an impressive win. I don't know that the power shot that I saw was a total knockout, but I'll give credit where he's due. It's a solid win after a dry spell, but Kevin Aguilar just didn't look himself. I guess did not appear to be the fighter that I had studied going into this.
Yeah, and also hadn't been TKO'd since, what was it, 2013 or whatever, in the Leonard Garcia fight. So this is a guy who'd been exceptionally durable in Aguilar. But, that's why we watch MMA, right? That's why we watch combat sports, these X factors that we're not aware of. And, you look at my picks, they weren't very good on Saturday. I mean, I think I made up for it with Fury Wilder. But, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that people didn't fight really as expected. That was kind of a theme to me with the card on Saturday.
The next fight was interesting as well because we just got to see things that we weren't expecting. Riddell, however you go pronouncing it, I did actually hear it both ways. Interesting fight. His ground game was really just overpowering. And then he just volumed away. It's kind of like desperate takedown defenses or takedown attempts that I hate to see. But honestly, with Riddell, I did not see him being on this level of striking. I mean, they knocked him down in the first. He had a surge right out of the gate. And I think that means a lot to the judges. I know it means a lot to me when initially started watching a fight. I know people were upset about this, but at the same time, I can see it. I know when you look at a fight and you have, there's no other way to look at it. When you have kind of like the John Jones-esque takedowns, right? Just the little takedowns that not much happens with. It's just a takedown to try to point fight. Cesar Vejeda does a great job with them too, in terms of just trying to point fight off takedowns. I don't really put a lot of stock in that. This was a close fight. I could say I do believe it went to the right person, and he definitely, for that point, he saw a close fight, he saw a win, and he makes a massive call out afterwards, which maybe dial it back just a little bit.
But one thing too, on the other side, Mustafayev, who is a very versatile striker, a very powerful striker, a very unorthodox striker, a very creative striker. This pretty much looked like a standard, obviously opposite standard stances, but a very standard kickboxing match, which favors a guy like Riddle, who doesn't throw a lot of unorthodox stuff. I was looking at Mustafayev, and we had seen his spinning kicks and all these things, and he just didn't do that at all against Riddle. So what happens? You have a basically squared up kickboxing match, and Riddle did fine in that environment. The reason I picked Mustafayev for this fight is I thought Riddle's style was a little too basic for him, but Mustafayev fought in a very basic way. He allowed it to be a pretty standard kickboxing match where Riddle was able to not just hold his own, but really land some power shots and kind of take it over. So it's also Mustafayev, I don't think, did all the things we've seen him do in previous fights, and I think in this one it cost him.
Yeah, I you know what? That's a beautiful way to put it. It's almost like he fought down to his competition. Sometimes you'll see somebody.
Yeah, that's what it looked like.
Yeah, confusing to watch. What wasn't confusing to watch was Ben Sassoli, because we literally listen. I know we're gonna record the Fury Wilder, and there was a lot of things we said in that preview that, I mean, it was like we knew what was gonna happen in the fight.
One of the things smarter than we really are. By the way,
yes, we got lucky.
A blind pig finds a truffle sometimes. Come on.
Yes. So, listen, Ben Sassoli, we talked about it. Just kept walking into the power. I mean, I get it. You're a heavyweight. You want to be that guy that shows you've got the chin of stone that can walk through the fire and come out the other end knocking somebody else out. But Ben Sassoli is not that guy. And more often than not, when you have someone that's not that guy, the fights don't end well. And this is a perfect example. He had opportunities to back up and recompose himself and say, listen, I'm putting myself at best in a 50-50 here. I'm going to land the big shot, or he's going to land the big shot. And it just seemed like it was mounting against Ben. And then obviously, we know exactly what happens. He gets knocked out. We take it for granted because we often look at the heavyweights as somebody's going to get knocked out. But the manner in which heavyweights fight dictates a lot of how their outcomes are.
Marcos Rogerio de Lima was the bigger guy. He was the more active guy. He was the rangier guy. For Sassoli to walk into him as though I'm going to land a bigger shot than this guy, I didn't understand that strategy at all. And I thought 10 seconds into this fight that Sassoli was in trouble. He just had the wrong strategy for the wrong guy with the wrong build and the wrong volume and the wrong accuracy. De Lima's not a fantastic heavyweight. I mean, he could get to maybe fringe top 10 status, something like that, but he's just big and he throws a lot. And Sassoli just didn't seem to have, you can't wade through those punches. He's not a pitter pat. Alexander Volkov, for example, who's a tall, skinnier heavyweight who relies a little bit more on accuracy. You can maybe wade through his punches to get something going. You're not going to wade through De Lima's punches if you're Ben Sassoli. You're going to take a couple and go out, and that's exactly what happened.
We talked also, Carolina had to get back on track here. And I will tell you that when you look at the judges and you go 30-26 all the way, I'm not going to say that she wasn't a brave fighter. I know a lot of people prop her up for being brave. I don't exactly know what that gets you in MMA, but apparently it gets you something. If you look at this fight from the strikes, she was dramatically outstruck. When you look at this fight from the takedowns, which we're going to talk about with Jimmy Crute in just a moment, she was dramatically taken down. It wasn't just on paper. When you watch this fight, it looked like she was just really not on the same level at any point. And you don't really see that in the UFC. Now, I'm not going to tell you that she didn't try to rally on the ground. She did have a few moments in this fight, but those moments were so few and far between. And in between, she was just getting annihilated. I just can't imagine there's a place for her in the UFC after a loss like this. She's a decent fighter. She's not a UFC fighter. And unfortunately, as harsh as that may sound, there's validity to that in her fights. She puts that on film. I actually would love to see her. I would love to see her go to Bellator. I would love to see her maybe go to the PFL, where I think she can thrive. I think she can take her confidence from the UFC, even though they're losses. I think she can take them elsewhere and be really productive. I don't want to see her be overwhelmed like that again. It's not enjoyable to watch.
Especially in a competitive division. There's just not a lot of room at 115 to stay away from the elite of the elite. And there are, 5 or 6 great ones. Of course, I think Xiaonan Yan, now a fringe top 10 after this performance. It's just too deep with talent in the UFC. One of the things you have to remember when you look at rosters and talent and why people stick around in certain divisions is how much room is there for this person with the talent that's there. 115 is tough. Very, very tough. And you know the code if you listen to enough MMA, and if you've commentated any MMA, you know the code. When I start talking about bravery and heart and guts, you're getting your ass kicked. The moment a commentator talks about bravery, the moment a commentator talks about guts and heart and will, and you're usually getting creamed. And they're trying to say something positive. And that's just the way it goes. It's just one of those things in life. And Yan Xiaonan just owned this fight. Her right eye was Kovalevic's right eye was an absolute mess. Xiaonan by the end was just walking through punches, no fear at all, punching bag with legs. She was all over her. Now, what's the ceiling for Xiaonan? I don't know. She looked excellent, looked very, very good. But Kovalevich, as you said, I just don't see her on the UFC level anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that because at this point, it's almost hard to use her as a talent barometer because of how soundly she's been getting beat.
And also, it's too talented. This dude, 115 is too talented. Too many good fighters. It's not like in a talent pool that's shallow where there aren't a lot of great fighters. If you just hang in there enough, you might get called up again. We see in certain divisions, fighters just kind of hang around long enough, their number comes up and they get a decent fight. 115 is too tough. And we're going to talk later, of course, about 155. That's another one of those Shark Tank divisions. Look, if you're not moving up, you're really moving down. And Kovalevich, I don't see there being room for her in a division this good. She can't just stick around and maybe hang out long enough to get back in it like she could at 25 or 35. 115, no way.
Jimmy Crute, man, he really got the short end of the stick here because he had to pull the curtain for Hooker and Felder. And my God, I expected this to be a war on the feet. I really did. We talked about it being a war on the feet. I specifically mentioned that I had not seen Jimmy Crute's ground game at the UFC level. And I don't know if he heard it or if his coaches heard it or if it didn't even matter. But good night. I mean, he had the record for takedowns in the first handful of minutes. He has the records for takedowns in a single round in a round that ended at 329. This was, by definition, an impressive win. I don't know how you could have a more impressive win than this. And unfortunately, this has been overshadowed by the war that Dan Hooker and Paul Felder had. But this really was Jimmy Crute staking his place in light heavyweight in a division that is stacked and hopefully putting himself in a position to, maybe fight a guy like OSP.
We got it wrong. I certainly got it wrong. I'm happy to own that one. Just like you did, I expected more of a stand-up war. That had been his style coming into this. And it was relentless takedowns. And once he got takedowns, good transitions, got into dominant position, mount, side mount, getting a brutal Kimura to finish the fight. But it was, I'm going to take this guy, Olashechik, completely out of his game. I'm going to come in with something he hasn't seen before. This is one of those things where the camp went in a totally different direction probably than every other fight. And he really showed his ground game. That's excellent. Next fighter is going to be ready. Yeah, I mean, this was a big kind of announcement at light heavyweight. It's always been a stacked division. Jimmy Crute might be the young gun in it right now, but next guy's going to be ready. I think Oleksiejczuk just wasn't ready, just like we weren't ready for this kind of fight from Jimmy Crute. Didn't expect it. Probably worked on his unorthodox stand-up game. Thought it'd be another kickboxing war, and Jimmy Crute flipped the script on him. So great strategy for him. I think Oleksiejczuk was on the defensive the entire time, had no real answer for it because he wasn't prepared for it. But, great adjustments by Jimmy Crute, and we'll see what the next fighter does because they better work on their takedown defense because his takedown was on point.
All right, saves you guys 10 minutes for this one. So if you go back, we both agreed that this was going to be a hard fight, a tough fight to call, a fight where both guys needed to be finished 100%. And that didn't happen, okay? It didn't. The fight went all 5 rounds, thankfully. It was a war. It was beautiful. It was a fun fight, emotional fight, ups and downs for both guys. I went back, and I actually rewatched it again today. I've got the second round in the 5th round for Felder. I've got 1, 3, and 4 for Hooker. I don't see a robbery. I don't see a moment where either guy was close to being out. I think a lot of this was, and we talked about it, preconceived notions. Oh, it's going to be a tough travel. Oh, it's going to be hometown judges. It really wasn't hometown judges, by the way. I just think it comes down to, and we talked about this earlier, are takedowns enough to overcome striking? And when you're looking at rounds and judging rounds, how do you put them together? I don't say that you can't make a case convincingly that Paul Felder won this fight, because I know that you can, but unfortunately, to us and the judges, these things have to go to decisions. And that's what happened. Dan Hooker gets the win. I thought Dan Hooker would get the win. I guess I'm more convinced that he won because I thought he would win. And I hate saying that, but at the end of the day, that's the way things go. This was a tough fight. As I mentioned, and I'll stand by this, I would love to see this get ran back in Philly, but unfortunately, emotions or not, Paul Felder seems like he is getting close to the end of his career if this isn't the end.
Why wouldn't he? That's my question. He's doing commentary. He's doing very, very well. He talked about his family, doesn't like staying away from him. He has other opportunities, other things he can do. And at 155, a guy like Paul Felder is like, look, he wants to be a contender. He wants to be a champion. He wants to be amongst the elite. And if he's not going to be there, I don't see a point for him. He's the kind of guy that wants to go all the way or it's not worth doing. And you always have to ask yourself when you're in a division like this, once you're out of title contention, which for now he would certainly be, it's a tough ladder up. Do I really want to go through that? It's no spring chicken. That's an important thing to keep in mind. He is 34 years old, and a lot of times sometimes that's guys' physical primes. With the number of fights he's been through, you start wearing down at this point. And did he lose fight? Very, very close. And people who, thought he won, I totally respect that. To me, takedowns count when things are pretty even, meaning if things are pretty even and then in the last minute and a half, a guy gets a takedown and stays on top the rest of the round, maybe that wins him a close round. So it's really a judgment call as to how close you think the round was when the takedown occurred. I definitely gave Hooker, I think, the even rounds 1 and 3, and or it's the other way around. I gave Hooker 1 and 3 and Felder 2 and 4, if I remember correctly. Thought it was tied going into that last round. So very, very close fight. And it seems like too often in MMA, there are only like obvious, ass whoopings and total robberies. Those are the only 2 categories. Well, there is a gray area of close fight or it's a judgment call. And I think it's totally fair that Dan Hooker won it, even though I picked Paul Felder. I believe he did some great work. Felder's face was a mess at the end. Really slick kickboxing. But a great fight by both guys. I don't see why, although he could make money and maybe make another run, Paul Felder would stick around. Simply because he has so many other opportunities. He doesn't need to put his body through this if he's not going to be a title contender. And he won't for the moment.
Yeah, I guess you have to look at it as legacy, right? Does him continuing to fight add to his legacy? Is he going to be better? And I will offer, and you obviously are no stranger to this, I would offer that fighters switching over to the commentary position impacts them negatively in scenarios like this. Because Paul Felder doesn't have to be Paul Felder the fighter. He can be Paul Felder the media guy, which is great. I love Paul Felder's commentary. I think he brings an excitement, a pace, an energy, an experience, a knowledge. There's a lot of good things. But, I'm not in this to watch fighters become commentators, okay? I'm in this to watch fighters fight. And when you give him that second career, he has to rethink his first career. And that doesn't mean that he's not putting all the time, effort, and energy into it. And to that point, this actually helped build this fight up. We talked about this was really the first time at UFC we've seen, that interaction in ring between two guys that are ultimately going to fight. But to bring this whole with your point from before, when I rewatched the fifth round, to me, the last minute of this really was telling. Felder had the striking advantage at that point as far as numbers were concerned. I believe Hooker got a takedown. Then he progressed through mount and guard. He was active even after he won the scramble. And sure, Felder got up, but then Hooker kept landing again. So, that really was the only time in the fight where I feel like if you were making a determination as to who won, I hate to say that, the first 4 rounds really didn't matter all that much, but they were much clearer to me. I guess we would really only be disagreeing with round 4, where, perhaps you could look at, I think maybe Felder was a little more active on the bottom than I would like to see, and maybe that's where you gave it to him. Just kind of talking through it. But yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. Does he want to continue to lose fights and then transfer over to commentary? Because I hate to say it, if you look at a losing fighter in a commentary position and they're trying to educate you, at the end of the day, you kind of look at them like, well, why would I listen to you? Look at how many fights you lost. But then again, why would somebody listen to us? But it's a little different, when they're sitting there at the commentary desk.
Yeah, I don't know. It's whenever a fighter has anything on the side, essentially, or outside of actually fighting that makes them money, you have to wonder what happens to your motivation. Not just commentary, but anything else. If you're successful, whatever it is, you have a successful side business, whatever it might be, or successful acting. Gina Carano made a lot more money doing films than she was ever going to make fighting. And it's to do anything else is stupid. The WWE pays Ronda Rousey very, very well. So the idea that she needed to continue, she didn't have to do it anymore. And if you don't have to, and you're not in it mentally, why put yourself through that? So it isn't just commentary as much as having some other way to pay the bills other than fighting. As far as, sticking around for some losses, I don't know how much that hurts his commentary perspective. A lot of, you either know what you're talking about or you don't. It doesn't necessarily matter, how many fights somebody lost. And I don't know how much that affects things or what level someone was successful at. I never fought in the UFC. A lot of people think I do decent commentary or did. So it's just one of those things where it's about motivation. How much do I need to do this? And as soon as there's something else where you don't need to do this, that's where the questions start. And Paul Felder talking about his family and wanting to spend time with his daughter and all these things. Hey man, stick with the commentary, have other stuff you can do. If it's not number one, it shouldn't exist in fighting. If it's not your number one priority, you shouldn't be doing it. It's a terrible hobby.
I guess to the commentary point that I made and you countered there, when I listen to Cormier's commentary and I see people criticize it online, the first thing that people bring up is, well, of course he doesn't know he lost to John Jones how many times. To the other side of that, though, I will offer that I listened to his rounds in this fight, in the corner work, and I was really, really taken back by, and maybe this is always like that, and I just never paid attention to it. It seemed like every time he sat down, they were talking about his kids. And it was like they were priming him for this emotional breakdown at the end of the fight, whether he won or lost. And I'm like, why in the hell, every time does he sit down, are you like, do it for your kids, do it for your kids? Like, that's what you're spending this 2 minutes with? This guy's in a war, right? There's a little tactical advantage you could probably be teaching him. And instead you're just, do it for your kids, do it for your kids. And then I'm like, you're just building this emotion balloon, right? And no matter what happens, it's going to pop. And it really took me back where that, and I believe, I don't know if you listened to this, but apparently Jimmy Crute's coach was just screaming. Screaming so loud during his match that I had to actually listen to it to hear it, to believe it. I mean, it was like, what in the world? Does this guy have a megaphone or no?
You know, it's weird. I was never like that when I was coaching guys. I'm just not I mean, I yell during a fight so they can hear me and I can give out instructions, but I'm not an emotional guy. But it's one of those things where you don't know what motivates a fighter. Some people like the Teddy Atlas, thumping you in the chest and yelling and screaming. People love that. Some fighters like the Greg Jackson talking to you like a kindergarten teacher. It's different levels motivate different fighters. And so you have to know your guy and not just your particular style. You have to know what motivates your fighter. So I'm always, when I see something that to me doesn't make any sense, you might think, well, maybe that motivates that person. Maybe, they probably know better than I do what motivates their fighter. So always try to keep that in mind.
All right. So with that said, you really set us up perfectly when talking about corners to transition over to Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder in our recap of that fight, which, by the way, if you want to go back and listen to the preview and pretty much find out how it's going to happen, we tell you that. So we will be back very shortly with more content.